All right, so we're live, and today we're talking to Dr. Kenny Rhodes.
Just Kenny, please.
Just Dr. Kenny?
Just Kenny.
Oh, Kenny.
Just Kenny.
Okay. To Barney and multiple personality, and we're talking about Thomism and whether or not God exists. And so, yeah, let's just get started. Do you have anything to say, Kenny?
Probably got a lot to say.
Well, I think we should define Thomism just so people can understand what we're talking about.
Right. Yeah, that's probably the best. You want to go out Chihuahua?
Sure. Yeah. I'll probably
find the debate there.
Yeah.
The issue.
Yeah, I'll probably let Kenny talk most of the time since he has the degree. But basically the idea of Thomism. So it's a philosophical system of thought invented by St. Thomas Aquinas, who is known as the doctor of the church. He's the patron saint of the schools inside of the Catholic Church. And he invented several different arguments. Well, he actually took the arguments from Aristotle and other people, but he modified them for the Christian worldview. So it's sort of an Aristotelian Catholic kind of view of the world. And even though I guess Kenny's not a Catholic, but it's a general Christian view.
Yeah, I'm a peeping Thomas. That's what a Protestant Thomist is a peeping Thomist.
Yeah.
Yeah, Thomas would be the great synthesizer of theoretical thought. So he took really the best of philosophy, integrated it, and really what Thomist scholars would call him is the great synthesizer and the great philosopher of common sense.
Okay, so he's famous for the 5 arguments for God, right?
Right, that's correct. His 5 ways, yeah. Which really is not all he has to say about the existence of God. And the 5 ways come from the Summa Theologica, and he also has another book called the Summa Contra Gentiles, and then of course he wrote numerous other books concerning the power of God, commentary on Aristotle's works. He did number of other works throughout his young career. He died at 49, and the Summa was actually written as a book for beginner ministry students. And the Summa is probably one of the greatest philosophical works in the history of philosophy. And if you read it, it's like, wow, this is for beginners, because the thinking and his grasp of the greater issues is amazing.
It's also very difficult if you're not familiar with Aristotle. So,
yeah, let me say this right off the bat: Aristotelianism, the metaphysics that's connected to Aristotelianism, is not connected to Aristotle's physics. So while we know that there are some problems with Aristotle's physics, his metaphysics and physics do not stand together. So a lot of people think that Aristotle's been, thrown to the trash pit of history, but there's quite a resurgence in Aristotelianism. I find perusing the internet and looking at some of the schools, I think the University of Athens has a school or a a conference, something like that, every year on quantum mechanics and Aristotelianism, because it seems as if Aristotle got things right when it came to the issue of act and potency. Quantum theory being a tremendous illustration of raw potency, what would be called pure potency in the jargon of the Middle Ages. But it's quite interesting how modern science is showing us that to the potential is where reality is constructed, so to speak. And that's, I believe, a very powerful argument for God's existence being necessarily pure actuality, and God needing to move, that the great mover motion for Thomas and Aristotle had more to do with qualitative change, quantitative change, than it had to do with motion. And a lot of people think that the Principia, come on, help me out, the greatest, Newton. Somehow Newton's laws of motion have shown the idea that
with inertia.
Yeah, that somehow is disproven the act potency and motion argument. But locomotion was not really what Thomas was writing about when he talked about the most excellent argument in the 5 ways, which is his first way, which is he calls the argument from motion.
Before we move on, can you demystify the jargon a little bit?
Sure.
Relating to potentiality and actuality?
Yeah, well, in Thomism, you have, for example, the potency or the capacity of an essence. So, for example, if I have a gallon jug, the potency of a gallon jug is a gallon of liquid. So the idea is that an act of existence, what Thomas called esse, E-S-S-E, which is translated as act of being or act of existence, that is the actuality of an essence. And you actualize the potency of, say, the gallon jug by filling it. So potency is just, it is really related to how we talk, man, that guy's got great potential. So when we look at things, there are things that human beings have potential for that are limited according to the essence of humanity. So humanity doesn't have any ability or potency to flap their arms and fly. And neither does, say, a ball have the potency to bounce to the moon. So when we talk about potency, potency is limited by the essence of what a thing is. And so potency is limited, but something needs to move or act on that potency in order to actualize it. Is that clear as mud?
A little bit, yeah. So potentiality
seems like
is what a thing could be.
Yes.
If it were to fulfill its purpose, and in some way, no?
To fulfill what the essence is capable of.
To achieve the maximum of what it could be.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good way to put it. What would be human potency in the area of, say, sports? That's growing, of course, by better understanding of medicine and equipment and training. But there is going to be a limit to a human being's ability to run a 1,000-meter race in a certain amount of time. So that's the idea of the potential limited by the essence of something. Again, I know unless...
In other words, but that sounds like you're talking about a physical limit, though. there's a physical limit to this.
Well, yeah, there's a limit. There's going to be a limit to potency for sure. Limited by what a thing is. Quite natural. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing that I like to consider is, like, you know, if you put like two chemicals together, it's only going to make a certain kind of reaction given what the chemicals are. That's kind of the idea.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so the potency of what is it? Carbon is immense, while the potency of helium is what it is.
Yeah, and not only that, the idea of motion, say qualitative change, the changing of, say, helium. You know, you take away proton, neutron, and I think an electron, and you go back to hydrogen. You know, going the other way in the burning, the fusion in the sun. You know, converting hydrogen to helium. So that qualitative change, that idea of what is the potency there in hydrogen, and the idea is that with any motion, there's a necessity for something in act to produce that motion, that actualizing, and it has to be within, we're probably going ahead here, but it has to be within the cause, virtually, imminently, or formally. So, for example, like water to make an egg hard is not outside the issue of causality.
We'll get back to causes because that's a huge area that I want to prod into. But we were still on potentiality and actuality. So God, Thomas defines God as pure actuality.
Pure actuality, yeah. Not only that, but the unmoved mover, the idea that motion is directly related to this act potency distinction. So pure actuality would be Thomas's idea of God as well as Aristotle's idea of God. So the key is motion is the movement from potency to act. And that's what we call motion.
In other words, God cannot become any better than he is.
Right. That which is pure actuality, has no potency whatsoever.
Okay. So how do you go from pure actuality, which cannot develop any further, into moving something else into existence? Because it would be logically it would indicate to me that he does not change. He does not need anything else to exist. He already has achieved. He already is achieved everything that ever could be and ever will be, and right?
Well, we're talking about the essence of God at that point. Yeah, God's essence is pure act. So his relationship to creation is something.
When you say pure act, that is in relation to the actuality, or as the verb act, as in to act?
Pure actuality as in act, life, existence. He's the highest of anything or everything, and he's not even proper to call God an anything.
Yeah, it's with regards to the act potency distinction.
Yeah, God is purely actual, and another way to look at this is that his essence is existence itself. There's an identity between God's essence and existence. That there's nothing in God that is going to be composite, like act and potency. God's not going to have any potency there that can be actualized because he is literally pure existence, pure act. And so what is God? He is.
Yeah, okay. That statement makes philosophical sense to me. What I do not see is how do you get anywhere from that? If he is all there is, if he is, if he in himself is pure act, then why would he create something? How would he create something? If he's unchanging, right?
Sure.
How does he begin that movement?
That,
How is he the cause?
that is not a movement in his essence. I think if you flip it around, it's going to make better sense and look at it from an a posteriori way, you know, from experience, from that which is. He's the explanation for all that is. And to start with him and then ask the questions, why did he create, or why did he do this? We're in a realm, once again, where there's a little bit of agnosticism. We can't fully understand God. And so that's why if the first time I joined the Great Debate community and was talking to Steve and the guys, that's where I brought in the issue of analogical predication, where the words we use of God are analogies and not univocal statements of how his state of affairs actually is, because we can't know God in his essence in a univocal, which is just, you know, one voice. What we say here is, you know, exactly what God is.
Equivalence.
Yeah. So our words are unable to truly describe God. And I like to put it like this. And if I'm talking too much, just, you know, jump in.
No. You're the star of this.
No, I'm not the star. I don't want to be the star. The idea is this. I try to define it like this, and I know it's not a perfect analogy because we have to talk about nothingness in analogical ways because we can't define it, but we also can't define pure actuality or one whose essence is existence. We can't talk about that one either in a univocal way. So we have to use this analogical predication. So my illustrations and my analogies aren't going to be perfect, but I do like to say, you know, the knowledge that we can glean about God is true knowledge. It's just, we just don't have the capacity to have complete knowledge. And I use the illustration of light, the electromagnetic stuff that's out there. That you know, we have visible light in front of us, and all we can see is the visible light spectrum. But there's a whole lot going on, from gamma rays and radio waves to ultraviolet. They are real things, but we don't have the capacity with our eyes to see the full electromagnetic spectrum. And so while what we can see about it is true and it's real knowledge, we don't have the capacity to take in the whole electromagnetic spectrum. So that's the way I like to illustrate it for people.
Okay. So it's not a perfect analogy, but
right, yeah.
You're conveying from the perspective of a personal experience.
No, I'm talking about what would be divine revelation in Scripture, the way that.
No, I mean about light.
Oh, sure, yeah. All analogies are going to break down at any point, and so that's more of the issue of knowledge and what we can know about God, because sometimes people like to point out that analogical predication is going to lead to utter agnosticism and the inability to have any kind of knowledge. But there's just enough likeness in the being, there's just enough likeness of finite being to infinite being that we can have some real knowledge there. But it's analogical.
Yeah.
And now a word from our sponsor.
No, I'm stuck on how to ask the question without being stupid. It's a simple question, and it might. So how do you discern which of the analogies are true, and which are construed, and which are false, and which are
Well, I'm not using analogies to inform me of what God is. The predication is analogical predication. So when I say, for example, God is good, my wife is good, the ice cream is good, the dog is good, the univocal sense is in the concept of goodness. I know what that concept is, but God's goodness, my wife's goodness, my dog's goodness, ice cream goodness, it's analogical in the way I'm applying and predicating goodness to each one of those categories. So it's not analogies, you know, like some people like to do the Trinity with, you know, an egg, you know, shell. Yeah, that's not at all what I'm talking about. I'm talking about God talk in the sense of how our finite words relate to an infinite, quote unquote, being.
an infinite, purely actual being.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. A necessary, purely actual one whose essence is existence.
So we have a
Well,
question.
quick question about.
We have a question
Okay.
from the comments real quick. Midnight Sparkles asks, was Thomas Aquinas divinely inspired by God?
No, this is the light of natural reason. This is accessible to any human being. And Plato, Aristotle, Augustine, all the great minds, all the great philosophers spoke like this.
Yeah, I would agree, but there is a story of where he had sort of a vision of God, or vision of something. I don't know if it was God and that he said that he stopped writing because of that vision.
Sure.
Yeah, because he just said that everything that he wrote was basically nothing compared to what he saw.
Yeah, nothing but straw. Yeah. Who knows? He could have had a stroke, you know. So I'm not at all going to, you know, to lay credence to that story, although it's fun to talk about. But when we're talking about inspired, that's bringing into it the biblical notion of God literally moving upon a prophet or an apostle to inscripturate his word. So inspiration, you know, the Latin inspire, in spirit, also enthusiasm in God, these ideas of being moved by God. But the word inspiration, as we use it in theology, is totally different when I say, man, I was really inspired when I wrote that song, or I was inspired to write this poetry. So you could you know, use inspiration in a lot of things, but when it comes theologically, absolutely not. Thomas was not inspired by God in that theological sense. Was he a man of God? Absolutely. Was he a great saint? Yeah. I love some of the stories. They called him the dumb ox because he was very quiet, and a story actually is shared where he was extremely naive as well. And so the story said that his fellow students were saying, look, Thomas, look out the window. There's an elephant flying. And he gets up and runs to the window, and everybody laughs at him. And he retorts back, you know, I'd rather believe that an elephant was flying, that my brothers would lie to me. But he was a very fat man as well. He didn't ride on his donkey because he had compassion for the donkey.
He's breaking that donkey's back, probably. Hey, quick question now. This distinction between actual and I'm calling it potential in my mind. If is God, I'm assuming, and I wanted to just clarification that everything that we observe, or everything that we interact with, it has potentials. It's on the potential side. Not it has some actuality, but it's generally a mix between actuality and the potential.
Exactly.
And I'm talking about everything in the universe is potentiality.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
And God is actuality.
Pure actuality.
Pure actuality. So I'm trying to understand. It seems that when this argument being laid out seems to have the effect of special pleading, because if everything has this potential, and then you make this exception for God. My two questions is, what justifies this exception? And then my second question would be, what reasoning would you present to show that this actual thing is even possible, or that it even causes this effect of potentiality? Because if it's all actual, then it seems to me that I wouldn't understand the process of it actually then creating things that are potential, because it itself lacks that potentiality.
Okay, would you hold that question real quick, and I'm going to share how the idea of act and potency came into theoretical thought, and hopefully I can remember it without goofing up on it. Parmenides, he is famous for saying whatever is. And so Parmenides was what we call a monist, and he saw all reality as one, as being itself. He would say that whatever is, there's no such thing as change, i.e. motion. And so Parmenides is the forerunner to pantheism. Now you've got another guy later on, not too much later on, but Heraclitus, who saw everything as change. He was famous for saying you can't step in the same river twice. All things are in a flux. And so that rule of thinking would be everything is pure becoming, and there's nothing that is of oneness or being. Well, I think I may have goofed up on that one. But yeah, he was the guy that talked about everything is becoming, everything changes. But the flip side, I goofed up my stories here. It's in sense it's true, but with Parmenides, he was a monist, and the other side of that is the pluralist, and they would say no, there are many beings out there, and this is the whole idea of the one and the many, where we get even the phrase universe, e pluribus unum, university, unity and diversity. What accounts for the one and the many? So there were those that said, well, it's just pure being, and being is one. Those were the pantheists. Then you have on the other side the pluralists. No, being, there's many kinds of being, and they're all separated. And Aristotle, Plato come around. I'm giving the Reader's Digest version of this. Aristotle said, no, things are, the kind of being is there. It is plural, but there are different kinds of being out there. Not that all being is one, but they're different kinds of being. And the different kinds of being out there are simple beings. They just are what they are. Well, coming to Thomas, he said, no, there are different kinds of being out there, and the difference is how much potency they have related to act. So it gets you out of the conundrum of pantheism, and it explains the one and the many. And so now we get to this notion of act and potency in trying to describe being. Being is one, but also being is many. So how do we talk about being itself? Well, beings are different from one another in the kind of being they are, and the kind of being they are is the admixture admixture of act and potency, different essences out there that have different capacities for potency, but all being is an admixture of act and potency. Now, using effect back to the cause, since all being is a different kind of being, and the act potency, every being is at a different level in its act potency distinction, we reason back to that which has started this place, that which has caused being itself. And therefore, for any act potency composition there must be one. For any potency to be actualized, there must be one who is pure act himself or itself without any potency at all, or you could never get this act potency composition. So it's kind of the Richard Dawkins thought. You know, he thinks of God as very complex. And what is God? You know, how do we count God? Well, God is actually simple.
Well, hold on. My first that was really good the way you explained it.
Okay.
My objection to this is that even if you were right, let's say, for instance, even if I was to accept the principle of actuality, and God is purely actual,
Mm-hmm.
I think you haven't really because he could be fully potential. This could work on a being that's fully potential that
Yeah,
causes things to be actual. So I'm trying to understand, how are you making this distinction that he's fully actual and not fully potential? Because the same argument that you made could work for potentiality too.
Because potential is nothing.
Can I expand upon that a little bit?
Sure.
So if potential is what it could be, and actuality is what it is, one way to look at it would be entropy. The state of zero entropy would be pure potential, right?
Okay.
As pure potential without space and time would want to be something. Want is one of those analogical
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. If in any way it could start being something, it would start developing, creating space and time itself, and beginning the process of reducing entropy. The universe, once it completely develops, will become the state of maximum entropy, like everything again equalized into a state where nothing more can happen, a state of permanent static actuality. Everything that has happened has happened. Everything that could have happened has happened, right? And so
I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Okay.
I would just simply say this. My potency to be a piano player, the potency is there, let's say virtually, because as a human being, I have the fingers and the feet and the brain that could allow me to be a piano player. But that has to be actualized. I can't poof myself into a piano player. So potency is kind of like relative non-being. You can't have a pure nothing. And that's what potency is. So it's to confuse what the terms are to say that God could be pure potency.
Yeah.
Can you say that again?
What's that? I'm sorry?
Can you say that again, please?
Yeah, potency is it's relative non-being. It's like nothing. My potency to be a piano player is there because it's a possibility within the essence of a human being. But there is no way that I can actualize myself to be a piano player. I would have to get books, and that knowledge would have to come from without in an act of actuality. So potency is nothingness. It's like, again, saying, well, the nothingness caused the act. The potency caused itself to be actual. And so this is the idea that something in motion has to be moved by that which is already in actuality to whatever is being moved in that essence. So I can't poof myself a great runner, a great piano player, because it's relative nothing.
What you're doing here is calling me out for special pleading, even though it.
Oh, not at all.
No, but it is, and it's righteously so, right?
Okay.
So I have used special pleading for something that I've called pure potentiality, because nothing in the universe is pure potentiality. Everything is partially one or the other and gets its actuality from something from outside, gets its actuality manifested from outside. I get that. I agree with that. But I just want to say,
we can call it whatever we want, but it's going to have a metaphysical reality. There's going to have to be some being there in order to bring into existence this relative non-being.
Okay. Well, when you say,
I would say that needs to be justified, though. That's a claim.
Well, we see it everywhere.
That's not.
Hold
on. Let me just make this argument.
Sure.
What you is that you've made the statement that generalizes to everything, and then you've pleaded out one to create the causal connection. You've pleaded out one instance and said, well, this can't work in this particular instance. But I need to have a flavor of special pleading to it, especially if you're making this universal claim.
You broke up
saying
on
that
me
there's an
there.
exception.
I missed part of that. You broke up on me.
Oh, I'm sorry. What I was saying is that if you're making a universal claim, and then you say, well, but this particular entity doesn't obey this universal law that you've put forth, then how is that not special pleading, or how are you not falling victim to that?
Oh, I see what you're saying. To ever have anything that is in composition, there must be one who is outside of that realm of thingness. You must have something that grounds existential reality. And so maybe I didn't explain myself very well, but I'm not special pleading that God is exempt from this act potency distinction. What I'm saying is that there must be what we might call a necessary being. It's the whole infinite regress thing. And when we talk about a causal chain of bringing into existence these essences that are act in potency, this is a hierarchical causal chain, or what we might call a per accident causal chain. It's like trying to account for the motion of a train by just adding more cars to it, saying, well, we can get the motion if we add 10 more oil tankers and a couple more box cars. You have to have something that moves, that accounts for the motion of everything else. You cannot have an infinite regress. It's like saying that you can have an infinite amount of ignorant people, and out of that infinite chain of ignorance, you can get brilliance. You have to have something that's fully actual to ever get anything to move from potency to act.
So I just want to bring in a comment, because so obviously I agree with you on that, but
Sure.
Max Shepard keeps asking about virtual particles. I just hear what your response to that is.
Well, I was with Hugh Ross this weekend, and I had asked him about the quantum and quantum fluctuations and bringing things, those virtual particles popping into existence. We call them virtual for a reason. They don't exist, for one. But he said that if you have something of the mass of the universe that quantumly, and I might get the verbiage wrong here, that quantumly fluxes into existence, the slapback time back to the quantum foam is 10 to the minus 102 seconds. So you would still have to have something that actualizes that potency and then holds that potency in existence, or it's just going to return to nothingness.
Okay, so I can actually address that if you want,
Sure,
on
yeah,
why that's
yeah.
the wrong interpretation. So we're using an analogy with quantum fluctuations in our current universe for that. Quantum fluctuations in our current universe are dependent on time and space.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Exactly.
So saying that the universe came about from quantum fluctuations is nonsensical, because quantum fluctuations in time and space created the universe, which then contains and creates time and space. Oh, but
I think I heard you write that or something, or say that, and I agree with you. Yeah.
Okay, so but again, it's an analogous process. Where do quantum fluctuations come from? They come from the Heisenberg uncertainty principle and the measurement problem. If you measure very precisely the time of a particle, if you take a very small amount of time of a particle, you get a great uncertainty in its energy. So even if you measure a particle with zero energy, meaning a particle that isn't there, if you measure its time very, very finely, it will have an uncertainty in energy. The shorter amount of time you measure, the greater the uncertainty of energy. So it literally works out as, so you could have a particle with a lot of energy, mass, momentum, whatever, at that point, right? And as time ticks on, that uncertainty diminishes, and on average, you get the effect that the particle is not there. But when you measure interactions, it appears as though those particles really are there. Interactions between matter are explained by those particles. We can do, there is an exact experiment called the Casimir effect, which literally proves those particles.
Kashmir, as in Led
Casimir.
As in Led Zeppelin?
Casimir.
I'm just messing with you.
Oh,
that's where they put the metal plates together, right?
So yeah, that's the one with the metal plates.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
The idea goes like this: if you have no time whatsoever, because time doesn't exist yet, how finely are you measuring time?
Right.
Okay, you're measuring it with infinite precision. The interval of time that you're measuring is infinitely small. What is your uncertainty in energy at that point? It is infinite.
Right. Right.
So you have somewhere between 0 and infinite energy to create your universe out of. And then time starts flowing. And under normal conditions, everything collapses and disappears instantly. Right?
Yeah.
And then you have, again, an infinite uncertainty in time, an infinite precision in time, and an infinite uncertainty, and another universe is formed. And that cycle of creation and annihilation of universe goes on constantly. There is a small probability that the universe that you have created will bounce a little longer sometimes. So it will not go back in Planck time in a section of a millisecond, but it will go one section of a millisecond later. And if you go through that process again and again and again and again and again, some of those jumps will last longer, because everything we're talking about is uncertain and is has a probability. the probability that that virtual pair of particles will return their energy is also there. On average, it'll work, but sometimes they can exist a little bit longer, and sometimes some things can happen which will make them actually separate out and be really there. And then the entropic principle comes in. Sometimes, very, very infinitely rarely in all those infinite oscillations, it will come about that the universe will bounce in thousands of years, millions of years, billions of years intervals. And then you can have a period of time of an actual universe in between that. And we're in one of those bounces, one of those creations. The universe yet hasn't returned its energy and stopped again the flowing of time. The entropy has not decreased, has not increased to the maximum yet. Why are we in that universe? The entropic principle. We are in that universe because that universe is long enough for us to measure it.
Yep, that's interesting.
Lucky, huh?
It's an interesting possibility. Some things you have to consider is, Copenhagen interpretation isn't demonstrated to be true. We don't know for sure. And also, the Thomistic argument doesn't have anything to do with the beginning of the universe, right?
Right.
So,
the universe could be infinite. And again, the universe is still composed of what it is and that it is, which is the essence existence, which is a corollary to act potency. See, there's nothing within the essence of the universe that explains itself. What a thing is and that a thing is distinct. So we're looking at that which accounts for itself by virtue of what it is. And that's why we account for God and we say that he is a necessary being. So even if we had an infinite multiverse brain theory, M theory, it would still have to have an ontological grounding. You also have the problem with the universe you described as the issue of the principle of proportionate causality. You have a mindless, random process that's given rise to mind and consciousness, which quantum mechanics actually seems to tell us that mind is behind reality anyway.
No, it doesn't. No.
Well, a lot of people would say that. A lot of scientists would say that.
No,
because the
not
mind
a lot of.
is affecting.
You're talking about the observer effect.
Right.
Yeah,
all I'm saying is that mind. You've got this
no
issue of these.
Wait. Let's clear this up immediately because that's also a part of the jargon. An observer can be a particle. An observer can be anything that performs a measurement, an interaction. It does not have to be an intelligent. It doesn't have to have a mind. The part where people come in and say, "Oh, an observer, that's a person who is observing the process. Therefore, we need a mind." That's just woo. That's people invoking quantum for mystical purposes.
Well, I've read a lot of physicists that would say that exact thing, what I just said. So I'll have to look into that.
So we have another question from Steve, actually. He wants to know, well, he's saying that the PSR doesn't necessarily have to hold. I have my own views on that, but I'd be interested to see what you have to say.
I'm not arguing for that. That's a issue of Leibniz and Thomas Aquinas didn't argue in that way. I'm arguing that reality is composed of act potency and essence and existence, and you therefore must have one whose essence is existence and is pure actuality to account for the composition that we see in reality itself. what put reality together. You have to have one who his essence is to exist in order to account for composition of essence and existence in the universe.
Right. Yeah. So a lot of Thomists don't hold to the PSR. They hold to like a weaker version, which is different. It's basically what Kenny said.
I'm not opposed to, I think things do need to have a reason why. I think it's certainly rational to ask, something for a sufficient reason. And as William Lane Craig, he likes to use the Leibniz cosmological argument, and everything needing a sufficient reason for why it is. God's sufficient reason is within his own essence. His existence is explained because his essence is to exist, and he accounts for that which is composed of essence and existence, which is, once again, what a thing is and that a thing is are distinct. And we go by that by, for example, if I'm going to define what a dog is, or a pterodactyl, or a phoenix, I can define those, but it doesn't give me any inclination of whether those things exist. So I can learn a lot about an essence, but it doesn't inform me whether or not that thing exists. And once I learn that it exists, I learn nothing more than the fact that it exists. And then I understand its essence more and more, and I study it. So there is not a separation of what a thing is and that a thing is, but there's a distinction in what a thing is and that a thing is. Because I'm not informed whether or not something exists by getting its definition. Now with God, once you go through all of the stuff, the marching logically from all this stuff, you can look back and say, well, God's explanation is he exists. And so it becomes kind of a self-evident truth at that point, because God exists, God's essence is existence, the predicate collapses into the subject, and so God is existence. Now, I would never use that as an argument for God's existence, but I'm just demonstrating how these work back and forth and how you can look at it. But I start with the effect and reason back to the cause.
Yep. There was something else that somebody asked. Oh, well, somebody asked, this is a kind of a difficult topic to conquer, but I think that it's something that we should probably talk about. They said they can accept that we have this pure actual being, but they can't accept that it has a mind. Would you like to?
I think I would just, again, Aquinas said that things can be known through their effects. And I just find it interesting that so many people postulate a cause for the universe that doesn't have the attributes that human beings have. It's contrary to causality that you would start off with something that is mindless, purposeless, and turn out with that which has a mind and has a purpose and is actually looking and explaining the universe. So I think causality tells us that minds beget minds. So I would argue it that way.
So, well, I think that we have to consider that, the analogous language thing here, right? Because whenever we say that God is intelligent, I don't know if Aquinas would say has a mind, because that has a lot of modern philosophy baggage with it. But we mean that he has something analogous to knowledge, basically, and will and stuff like that. And so it's kind of complicated, but so Aquinas saw knowledge as being immaterial. So basically what he says is that because God is immaterial, he also has knowledge. Because he saw Aquinas and Aristotle, they saw as distinct things that are made of. He saw that they're made of what's called matter and form, and that's basically matter is basically what makes things particular, individuated. It's what things are made out of, like wood or something like that, and then the form is what it is, like it's a table, for example, and the form is what it is, like a table is universally predicated. It can be applied to many different things. There can be many different tables made out of different materials and stuff like that. And since it's universal, he would say that it's immaterial. It's not particularized. And since God would be the same way, he would say that God is intelligent in that way, in that sort of analogous sense. And that's what we mean whenever we say that God is intelligent.
Since we're talking about, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna see if you could clarify or add to that.
Well, I was just reminded, since we're talking about Thomism, he certainly adopted Aristotle's idea of the four causes, and one is the formal cause, which is the blueprint, the idea, the concept, what I was referencing in Thomism as the essence. And then he spoke of the material cause, which would be that which the form is instantiated in. And of course, Aristotle and Aquinas were not Platonists, so these ideas don't exist outside as totally perfect immaterial things, but they exist once they're instantiated in matter. And again, that's very much related to the idea of the esse and essentia composition, which is essence and existence. The esse is literally the act of existing of the essence. And so while they can be distinguished, they can't be separated, like the idea the form can exist without the matter that it's instantiated in. Then he had the idea of efficient causation, which would be the agent that was operating, that brought the form together with the matter. And then, of course, the final cause, which is the very purpose for why the agent is acting. And I'm just going to throw this out there. I don't have the argument at all put together, but I'm looking to kind of work on it. But I see evolution moving in a way that we can see a final causality within the idea of evolution, that things are moving toward existence and life, and there really seems to be a purpose behind this entire motion of evolution. It seems to be purposeful. And so in that sense, I think it falls within Aristotle's final causality, that things are selected for life. The heart is selected for pumping blood. It has a purpose. It has a final cause involved in it. And so anyway, I think theism really answers all of the big questions of life, and is coherent and rational. And while there's a lot of Christians out there that give a lot of horrible horrible arguments. I cringe every time I hear a young earth creationist talk about science. I'm not a scientist. I love it, but I love it enough to try to learn what the scientists are saying before I start pontificating about what I don't know. So I really respect science and scientists. As a matter of fact, it was funny this weekend, being in RTB. You know, I'm down there with David Rogstead, Jeff Zweerink, Hugh Ross, and I'm in awe of the scientists. You know, I'm just in awe of scientists. I love what they do, but being that they're Christians down there at RTB and they love the Lord, it was the theologian that they were happy to see. So it was kind of cool. I was in awe of the scientists, and the scientists were happy to have a theologian there to talk to and ask questions. But anyway, I absolutely love science, and I think as Christians, we need to really learn it and honor the enterprise in a way that we learn the arguments and we don't do a disservice. As a matter of fact, I think it was Saint Augustine who said that Christians need to learn what they're talking about, because if they start talking about something they don't know what they're talking about, those unbelievers are going to see it, notice, and the gospel is going to be hurt in light of that. So if I said anything scientifically wrong today, let me know and I'll correct it. And
could I?
No, we are being very charitable today, because obviously you're new and we want to let you get your views out. So that's why, like, there's a lot of points that you've made that I would generally challenge, but you know, I kind of want to hear the whole argument before I start, you know, going into some particular details, if you know what I mean.
Sure. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I'm gonna have to get running here in a few minutes, but mainly because my back. I'm sitting out here on this hard swing to get away from everybody, and my butt is asleep because of my sciatica spin.
We're gonna have to. We're gonna have to end this anyway. So
yeah, I hope to have you back on soon.
Yeah, would love to. Absolutely.
But I just want to address something in the comments, because they're talking about causality being out of date and stuff like that. Like, they think that causality doesn't matter anymore. It's important to make a distinction between indeterminism and the kind of causality that we're talking about as Thomist, because, you know, Thomists believe in free will. So we don't think that everything has to be deterministic in that sense.
Well, show me something that comes to be without efficient causation, and I'll secede the point.
Right. So we think that there has to be basically what we think is that there has to be a ground of being to everything. So even, say, virtual particles, if they come into existence without a prior cause, we would say that there still has to be a ground for the actuality there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
I think I put in my book, you know, uranium decaying into radium, 235 into something. You know, there's still something there that's causing something, and our ignorance of what's going on does not get away with causality, that something is producing something.
Right. Yeah, the basic idea is that you know, whatever exists, it has to have it's the essence existence distinction thing.
Yeah. An ontological grounding, even if the universe is eternal, there has to be a ontological priority, something that's ontologically prior, not necessarily temporally prior.
Right. And like, so here's like an example. Even if we were walking around and just out of nowhere, a bicycle popped into existence, right? And we were somehow able to determine using science, that there was no prior cause to that. It just popped into existence. indeterminate, not determined by anything prior to it, there would still have to be something that makes it exist, because it is not its own existence in itself.
Right.
Well, hold on. Virtual particles do that all the time, and they do have an effect in reality, Hawking's radiation. So so this effect does occur where you have things that pop into existence, have an effect in reality, and then disappear.
Yeah,
now, now this might be my ignorance talking, but isn't that energy?
No, it's not.
Or what is that?
It's not.
It's not energy.
No. So it's. So Max keeps calling me out on that, and Ochi called me in to support him at one time, and Max is right. It does not have a physical cause. That energy is not there. You do not need to put any energy into the system to get out virtual particles.
But what is it? It's a something, right?
It's a fluctuation. Now there's a point of contention.
It's mathematical points. I would have understood it was energy. That there's a tremendous amount of energy at the in that whatever.
Well, just at the basic level, these are things that pop into existence.
Yeah, but I mean, I was just saying that that's perfectly possible from a Thomistic view. It just has to have a ground of being. So it has to be so it's divided into parts, right? And the parts that it's divided into
is composite. Whatever it is, it's what it is and that it is are distinct.
Right. And it doesn't have its existence in itself, so it has to get it from another. And ultimately, we think that has to be something that is existence, that has existence as its essence, and that's what we call God.
As far as causation for virtual particle goes, we are talking about Aristotelian ontological causation here, right?
Yeah.
I'm positing that quantum fluctuations could not exist if there was no time. Time is a requirement for quantum fluctuations. The existence of time.
It almost sounds like you're arguing from a Christian creationist point of view when you say that, because God is one who moves outside the time of the universe.
Yeah.
Something is going on. But what it is, who knows?
Pushback. Before we get to that, my pushback with that is because it seems like every time we get into a problem in which we're like, okay, time, for instance, Barney's bringing up time, and then when you posit the God as as more or less avoiding this principle because he's outside of space and time, it almost begs the question: how can you describe something that outside of space, outside of time, space and time doesn't apply to this entity? Right. I don't understand how are you then positing that this entity exists? What does that mean to be outside of space and time? How can you verify that? It's just by saying that statement, it seems to just be a claim that is really unverifiable, even logically.
Well, I can't explain God to you, my friend. But I would say.
But you've been explaining his effects, though. You've been explaining his effects, but can't explain the actual cause. And that's what I'm saying. If you're positing a cause that are generating effects, and then I ask you, well, how do you justify this cause? And you say, well, I can't explain the cause as you just said. Then how do I know that's really the cause?
Well, let me try to illustrate a different way. This may hit the point. This may not. The way Hugh Ross says it, because of the Big Bang, the evidence that the Big Bang comes into existence, that tells us that there is a causal agent outside of space and time as we know it in the universe. That tells us maybe a couple things that we can infer, that this causal agent maybe has the capacity to move in 2 dimensions of time, while the universe only has the capacity of 1 dimension of time. Of course, this is based very much on the principle of causality.
Okay, but just to stop you right here, since we're talking about causality, we're talking about what caused the universe.
Sure.
Causality is a temporal phenomenon. in terms of there must be a before and after. You have to, the causality that we're talking about, that we experience in this universe, has to conform to time.
Yeah.
And if you're saying that this is before the
This
universe,
is where the analogical predication comes in. But
I just want to make the point that if we're talking about before the universe, when there was no time, then this cause and effect reality that you're talking about doesn't exist, or really has no meaning. But yet you're then placing a cause and effect phenomenon before time exists. So I'm just trying to understand
in an analogical way.
But that still wouldn't work, because then like there's no framework, no space, no time, but you have a cause and effect analysis. It only works within the universe in the framework of having space, time.
You try to use physical causation. Yes, that's absolutely true.
Oh, I get the power of the argument for sure. But once again, we don't have a capacity to just go through this experiment with me. Let's say that you all do hold the position that I hold.
Okay.
How would you really describe a being who could bring the universe into existence? You would be saying the same things I'm saying. I'm saying we're going to have to speak of this being in an analogical way. The way he creates or the way we create and causation happens in the universe is going to be analogically like the way he creates and moves. But for me to give you a univocal explanation of it, I just can't.
Well, but this I think is the problem. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Barney, because you've been trying to get in.
No, I absolutely agree with that. If I was in your position, I would have no way to explain it. But that would force me to admit that my conclusion is wrong. It's unbased.
Unless there's evidence that this God has condescended and communicated to us.
Okay, so I will be very charitable and say yes, there is evidence. There is a lot of evidence. However, none of that evidence is unequivocal, meaning that if you know what the conclusion is, you can use the evidence to support that conclusion.
Sure. Yeah.
But if you are ignorant of what the conclusion is, you can never get to that conclusion from that evidence.
Once again, as a Christian, I hold that God has revealed himself. And I'm just trying to
clear up the misunderstanding between the skeptic mindset and the believing mindset, right?
Sure. Let me maybe illustrate like this. This is the first time Barney and I have been able to talk, and I'm learning something about you. You're learning something about me. It is going to take revelation for me to learn about you, because I can't get into your mind. You have to disclose yourself. And that's a way that God has revealed himself to human beings. It necessarily has to be that he has condescended and revealed himself to the created order, or we could only march the way I have with reason far enough. There has to be revelation involved there.
Yeah,
okay.
But I mean, as for time, the timelessness, I mean, that would be one case where we're just talking about it from negation, from the idea of negation. So we would negate things like before and after in God, and we might not be able to fully understand what that is, but we can come close. And someone wrote in the comment section is, if we can't fully understand God, then we can't assert that God exists. And I don't think that follows at all. I mean,
no.
We can't.
That's exactly what I'm saying, and that holds absolutely true from a skeptical worldview point.
Well,
because the argumentation for that is that in that way, I can manifest and claim true whatever the hell I want, because confirming evidence can be found for any statement that you choose to make, as long as you're willing to say that if it's confirming evidence, then it's confirmed. Right?
I get your point, but that's not what Christians are doing by any stretch of the imagination.
Oh, how is it not?
Well, I would even suspect it's from what you said earlier, and from Kylo, right? Am I pronouncing it right?
Talking about epistemology, some people believe things and they don't have any ground whatsoever.
No. I'm not saying that you're not grounded in like you don't have any reason for what you believe. I think the objections that we're making is the fact that we're looking at it from a bottom-up approach. We're looking at, okay, where does this evidence lead to which conclusions? And we don't have a conclusion or something that we're looking to prove. We're saying, okay, here's the evidence. Where does it lead us? And I think from the believer's perspective, they have a conclusion already, and they're trying to fill that conclusion with the evidence they find. Whatever evidence they find, for instance, if you say, "Oh, here's a rock," well, that rock is evidence for God. And that's simple. I know that's not your argument, but that's just somebody a simple. That's simple as I can make it. And I think that's what Barney is alluding to, is that right now you've posited a conclusion, and you're taking the evidence and making and kind of fitting it within that box. And the skeptic is saying, well, I don't understand how it fits in that box, but I'm taking this evidence and it doesn't seem to lead to that conclusion because you guys have asserted this being that exists. And then when we ask any details of this being, you correctly, and I agree with you, you said, well, I don't really know how to explain God. But then you go in and tell us all these descriptions of God. And that's, I think, is the problem that we're starting to come into, because you're positing a being that you really admittedly don't understand, but yet you're telling us all these properties of this being that you admittedly don't understand. So it seems to be like some disconnect there.
Well, I'm trying to, give the rational argument for God. Like I said, because God has revealed himself, there's certainly things that we can know about him, and he has to reveal himself or none of us could know anything. I have to reveal myself to you guys or you're not going to know anything about me as who I am as a person. So I think it's reasonable enough that when I look at the created order and I know that the answer to the universe cannot be found in itself, there must be an ontological ground to the universe itself. There must be a reason for being itself. And that's who Christians are calling God, this first cause, this one whose pure actuality, whose essence is existence, this unmoved mover. And the greatest minds throughout history have all concluded the same point.
Yeah, could I jump in here real quick? Because I can want to answer that as well, because here's the thing. So there are some things subject to revelation. I don't know if I would go as far as Kenny, because I think that you can prove that God is timeless. I think you can prove that God has a mind, has an intellect, and that
I certainly agree with that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but the disconnect here. Well, first of all, I should point out that most of the greatest apologists for from the Catholic view anyway, have been converts from atheism. For example, Gary Lagrange, Dr. Edward Fazer, and there's another one, John Sullivan. They were all converts from atheism based upon looking back at the rational argument. So I don't think it's fair to say that, oh, well, it's just Christians trying to justify, fit a square peg in a round hole. I don't think that's fair.
Can I just I need one piece of jargon clarified before you proceed. Proof. Yeah. What is proof?
So proof
when you say I can prove.
Right. So like a deductively valid argument that proceeds from true conclusions. Basically what I'd say.
Okay. Proof from deductively valid arguments is valuable only if the premises are sound.
Yeah, I said from true conclusion. or sorry, true premises.
Okay.
But to answer where the disconnect here is, it's where we're talking about analogical knowledge, or sorry, predication, and we're using the words analogically. So when we say God has intellect, we're not saying that God has intellect in the same way that we do. We're saying that it's similar, but we don't fully understand it. So whenever you hear us say that God is intelligent, that's what we're saying. We're saying there's something similar in God, but we can't fully understand it. So whenever we're telling you we cannot fully explain God, we cannot fully tell you what God is in his essence, we're being consistent there. We're just whenever we're saying God is intelligent in an analogical way, and also we cannot fully explain what God is.
And I do the
so
same
just-
way
just-
in explaining.
Wait,
I
wait,
do
wait.
the same thing in explaining women. I can't understand women. I have to predicate women analogically. Who could understand a woman?
My response to
A bit
that,
of comic relief there. Go ahead.
but my response to Alci is that first I meant no disrespect with my comments. I was just trying to get a point of clarification. The second thing is I understand the arguments that you guys are putting forward, but my issue with the argument is that I'm not trying to say you're putting a square peg into a round hole. My understanding of the arguments that you guys are putting forward is that this being exists in some way. And what has been presented is that this being exists outside of space and outside of time. That makes no sense to me. That makes no sense because I am a being within space and within time, and I'm trying to understand something that's outside. You guys have put forward this understanding that this being exists in this particular way, and my first question was, well, how do you know that this being exists in this particular way? What else, how can you demonstrate this? Or what argument can you present that this being exists? And seems like the arguments that have been presented have been, well, because we've experienced this thing in this universe, then it has to apply to outside the universe. Causation, for instance, was been the thing that's positive. Because we've always seen cause and effect, we need to have this cause of the universe. And that doesn't have to be true because the universe, everything inside the universe requires us to use the physical laws, which science says is bound by the universe. So the laws outside the universe or the physics outside the universe could be totally different than the physics that we have here today and the laws that we have here today. And that's why when I brought up the instance of time, having time for causality, it seemed to present an issue of how can you have this causality without having time or space. And right now, the only thing that seems to be holding this thing up is the assertion that this thing exists. But that assertion is still based on the fundamental reality of things that are occurring on inside the universe. And if you are using that to justify something that's going on outside the universe, it seems to be a problem to me. And maybe my objection isn't well stated, but that's why I'm pushing back a little bit, because I'm trying to understand how are you taking what's going the laws and the physics and things that we're applying inside the universe to a being that outside the universe, because that may not be true.
I certainly get what you're saying. The universe is a closed system. But I once again, I see the universe full of cause and effect. I see the universe full of things that come to be and pass away. And so I think it's quite rational that there must be an accounting for the universe in an ontological way. Everything, causation has to be grounded and existence has to be grounded. It's not a fallacy of composition to look at the universe and then say it applies to the whole, because if I have a red fence comprised of red boards, the entire fence is going to be red. And so a universe comprised of things that come to be and pass away and things that need causes, I think it's very rational to insist that those things must be grounded, and they give us a clue to the nature of reality. And beside that, I can't go any further.
Well, I think so. So something that what we're talking about here isn't a physical law. When we talk about causality from a Thomistic perspective, we're not talking about physics. We're talking about metaphysics. So whenever we're talking about the essence existence distinction, for example, that's not physics, that's metaphysics. And that's going to apply to anything that exists, which does not have existence as its essence. So it doesn't matter if it's in the universe or outside the universe, first of all. And I can argue that more. We're almost out of time, though. But I also want to get to this, what is time? How is God timeless? Eleanor Stump has a really good video on this, talking about what is eternity. If you look it up, it's interesting. I won't be able to do it as well because she draws a picture to explain it. But basically, what God's timelessness is, it's not just without time in the way you might think of it. It's being metaphysically greater than time. Because what time is, from the Aristotelian point of view, is motion with respect to before, measured with respect to before and after. And that motion and that before and after, those are divisions of actuality. It's a division. It's a way of limiting being. So, and that is not present in God, because we're talking about something that's completely simple and does not change. And so instead, God's existence extends across all of eternity, and all of eternity is present to God simultaneously and in a complete whole. And that, so it's, and you might think of that as being temporal, because it is present to things at the same time as things are here. But there's no time in God because there's no division. And that's at least sort of a start, as well as I can explain it in a starting thing. So.
Well, I know we have to go, and I want to say thank you guys for being here, and thank you guys for answering questions. I hope I wasn't too rough on you guys, but you know, I do like the back and forth, and I do like the argument, and I appreciate you guys. I'm coming in to make that.
I appreciate the pushback. You know, it only helps me to, you know, be a better scholar, a better communicator. I love these dialogues. Because it helps me to go back and say, okay, let me figure this thing out. So I'm going to be thinking about, you know, okay, how can I communicate some things a little better when it comes to God being outside of time and what that might look like, or so yeah, I appreciate it. I love the process of learning and back and forth. I just don't like when it becomes, you know, personal and people start, you know, getting rude and mean. That's where I sign off. But I appreciate you guys. You guys are more than gentlemen. So.
Yep. All right. Well, with that, we'll go ahead and end it. It's been a nice discussion. And
yeah.
Barney, do you want to take us out?
Hey, could you close us in prayer, Barney?
Oh, you don't want me to pray.
I'm going to take an offering, and Barney, you close us in prayer, all right?
No, it's been a pleasure, and not every conversation has to be about contention. Some conversations can be about trying to understand each other, right? There is a difference between just jumping at each other's throats and like trying to get an understanding of what the other side is talking about, clearing up the jargon and trying to get the point of the idea so that you can then attack the idea. See you next time.